So, on the last time on the Sleepless Nights channel, we ranked almost every Touhou Windows mainline game from easiest to hardest, an objective ranking based purely on how hard the games mopped the floor with me, and how much I ripped my hair out trying to get that glorious one continue clear. Today, however, the rankings are a bit different. This time, instead of basing it purely on difficulty, we're basing it on how fun the games are, how fair I think they are, how enjoyable they are to replay, and overall how high quality they are. Today, we are ranking the mainline Touhou games from worst to best. Enjoy! So before we get into the rankings, similar to last video, I would just like to make a couple things clear. Firstly, yes, this video once again will not be including Touhou 9. You all may be wondering, since I'm not ranking difficulty this time but quality, then it's probably valid to include Touhou 9 in this list. However, the main issue here is that I haven't played Touhou 9 all that much. The fact of the matter is, I don't think I've actually touched Touhou 9 ever since I played it for the very first video. Definitely not enough to form an opinion on how much I enjoy the game. If I were to include Touhou 9 in this ranking, inevitably I would be putting it at the very bottom, which frankly I don't think is very fair not only to the game itself but also the people who love the game, so I opted to just not include it yet again. Apart from that, all my reasonings for not including certain games and whatnot are pretty much the same from the other videos, such as not including PC98 and taking extra into account. So if you wanna hear me go into more detail for some reason, then just go watch the previous video, ya dummy. Anyway, I don't wanna dilly-dally for too long. I'm sure you all just want to see the rankings, so without further ado, let's get started with the first game, and in my opinion, the undisputed worst game in the Touhou series. Undefined Fantastic Object. To absolutely no one's surprise, the worst game in the series to me is none other than Touhou 12. If you've been following the channel for a while, you'll know that I have a deep-rooted hatred for this game, and that is all thanks to the god-awful gimmick. I'm sure I don't need to explain how this game works to you all, but just in case, I'll go over it briefly. The game's resource system relies on you collecting these UFOs that bounce around the screen and change color. Matching 3 of a specific color or all 3 colors of UFOs will grant you a big UFO that drops bonuses and resources upon killing it. This doesn't sound too bad, but having to chase these tiny ass UFOs through literal walls of bullets will more than likely be a bad time. A terrible time, in fact. I am not exaggerating when I call these things death traps, as most of your deaths in this game will probably be you trying to get a UFO before it changes colors. I will admit, the patterns, the bosses, they're not too bad. Some fights can get pretty annoying, like Unzan blocking the entire screen, Murasa's survival spell, and the entirety of Show, but overall I think some parts and patterns can be quite fun, which just makes it even more of a shame that this entire experience gets ruined by this awful gimmick. I know a lot of people do like Touhou 12 and think the gimmick can be fun and rewarding, but I'm also aware that this game can be very polarizing. People either absolutely love it or absolutely hate it, and I am on the absolutely hate it part. I can go on and on about how much I hate the UFO gimmick, but I feel like that would be going a bit too far, and you guys can just go watch my original video on UFO for a more in-depth review of it. Either way, having this system in place and be a crucial part of beating the game led to many frustrating moments for me, landing this game at the bottom of the list. Unconnected Marketeers is an interesting one to say the least. It's probably the most experimental game in the series, 2-player games aside, with some really wacky roguelike mechanics. However, experimenting with a relatively set-in-stone formula can be a bit of a double-edged sword, and sadly Touhou 18 proved to be just that. If you've been following my videos for a while, you'll know that I'm a bit of a boomer and enjoy simple mechanics, so naturally, Touhou 18 felt quite overwhelming for me. I played Touhou to enjoy the patterns and the intensity of dodging bullets. If I wanted to play a roguelike, I can always just launch Hades, Risk of Rain, or something like that. Point is, I simply think Touhou 18 is doing a bit too much, and it's taking away a lot of the enjoyment factor for me. I don't think the bosses are particularly bad, neither are the stages, but I don't think any of them are super memorable either, save for a couple spell cards. My main issue with the game is that it's very reliant on the roguelike mechanic, with the enemies having more HP than usual, forcing the player to play around the card system more. This seems weird to say considering you obviously need to utilize the gimmick or else it's obsolete, but again, I want to play Touhou for the bullet hell, not the roguelike. Is Unconnected Marketeers a bad game? No, definitely not, but when compared to the other entries, it definitely falls a bit short. Touhou 13. Probably a lot of people's first 1cc and one of the easiest games in the series, but sadly not one of the better ones in my opinion. 10 Desires is a weird game and probably the most gimmicky one to release at its time, with some crazy mechanics, shot types, and boss patterns. Now, me ranking these gimmicky games low probably makes you all think I hate gimmicks, which I guess to some extent is true, but what I actually dislike about Touhou 13 is less so the gimmick itself but more so how it affects resource collection. The main gimmick of 10 Desires is the transmitter. I can't really be bothered to explain it right now, so again, if you want an in-depth explanation, just watch the video I made on the game. But bottom line is, resource collection is heavily linked to this bar. Whenever you die, the trans immediately gets popped, and most of the time, this can be during very awkward situations, essentially throwing away multiple potential extends. Not to mention, it takes a while to fill up and requires you to sit on the top of the screen a bunch collecting these spirits for not only transmitter, but also bumps and extends, which in itself is annoying since you can't POC them, and most of the time they're in really stupid positions that are impossible to reach. The difficulty of the game doesn't really pick up until stage 4 in my opinion, which sounds like the norm, but stage 1 to 3 of this game is pretty much free, I'd say. It has some of the easiest patterns to date, and playing through it only to die to the last boss can be a bit of a slog. More than usual for this series at least. Overall though, a frustrating gimmick and somewhat lackluster difficulty lands 10 Desires near the bottom of the list. Now that we're done with the games I think fall somewhat short, let's move on to the rest of the series, which sadly, Wily Beast and Weakest Creature sits at the bottom of. Now I know putting it this low may seem weird to those who watched the video I made on it considering the praise I gave this game, but that's just what happens when the series is consistently good. Some games get pushed down the list. I still think Wily Beast is a great game, don't get me wrong here. Kiki is probably one of the most memorable stage 6 bosses in the series in my opinion, with a fantastic soundtrack accompanying a great fight. The main issue is, firstly, the gimmick is a bit of a recycle, albeit better than its previous counterpart. I don't think the Beast Spirit mechanic is nearly as frustrating as the UFO mechanic, but a fresh gimmick would have been nicer to have, I'd say. Next, the game isn't particularly hard either, meaning a lot of it wasn't that memorable to me. A lot of the bosses can just be bursted down with a wolf spirit, and a lot of the game actually just boils down to tanking with shields and rushing to collect spirits rather than actually learning the boss patterns. It's kind of a bummer to put this game as low as it is since I do think there's a lot to love about it, but when there's so much more great games in the series, some compromises do have to be made. If there's one word to describe Hidden Star in 4 seasons, it feels pretty average. Not that that's a bad thing, of course. Generally speaking, there's nothing crazy about Touhou 16 at all. Sure, there's the season gimmick, the releases, and a bunch of shot types, but a lot of it is really just more damage and the screen clear, not very different from what a lot of the other games already give you. The beauty in this, in my opinion, is that Touhou 16 is very easily digestible for a modern Touhou game. If you want to play a newer generation game but want something simple, then Hidden Star in 4 seasons is the perfect game for that. The patterns aren't super gimmicky, save for maybe Okina's last spell or the dancers, and the game doesn't really throw many curveballs at the player at all. There's really not that much to talk about regarding Touhou 16, it doesn't really do anything insane, but it doesn't really have anything to make me actively dislike it either. It's kinda just there. It's easy to pick up and play through casually, but it doesn't really offer anything more than that. It's a good game, but sadly not enough going for it to compete with the rest. Probably the most gimmicky game in the entire series in terms of boss patterns, Double Dealing Character is definitely one of the more memorable entries in the series with a pretty fun mechanic to match. The game plays around the point of collection system, which I actually really enjoy. It adds a layer of pressure that is just punishing enough to the player, but is also plenty rewarding if you learn the game enough. Touhou 14 I'd say is probably the most generous game when it comes to handing out resources, since if you master the POC mechanic, you get absolutely showered in extends. The bosses, like I said, are very gimmicky and most of the spell cards are very wacky to say the least. Wolf transformations, heads flying off, screen flips, hitbox changes, this game has it all. However, the main issue with this game is also its greatest strength, and it's that it can be a bit tiring to play through this game in my opinion with everything going on. It's on the harder side of games, and couple that with the gimmicky nature of it, Touhou 14 can be pretty hard to just casually pick up and do a run on. You pretty much have to re-practice all your routes and the spells when you want to 1cc it, and just getting a random 1cc can be difficult I'd say. I'd say I'm more consistent on 1ccing Touhou 11 than this game, even though people consider Touhou 11 to be way harder than DDC. So yeah, Double Dealing Character's greatest weakness is in line with its mechanic punishing greed, and telling the player that having too much of a good thing can be bad. I have actually grown to like Touhou 15 over time, and it surprises even myself. This game frustrated the hell out of me when I was aiming for my Legacy 1cc since this game, in simple terms, is hard as balls. However, playing it more, I have realized a lot of the patterns and spells are actually quite fun to dodge, and the Grace gimmick is pretty rewarding and fun to do. A lot of the spells and patterns of this game have a really good flow to them, and despite the difficulty, definitely has a method to the madness. Well, for the most part, of course. The main thing really holding this game back to me is just stage 5. The 5th stage of this game is probably one of the most frustrating levels in the series, with a very annoying boss waiting for you at the end. Clown Piece to this day still makes me want to rip my hair out. All her spells are just so infuriating to play through, and on top of that, her nods make me feel like I'm about to go blind with the speed the projectiles are moving. This is all just saying a lot considering nowadays I capture Junko's spells for fun, a boss considered by many to be one of, if not the hardest in the series. Anyway, despite the difficulty, I actually think this game is pretty easy to play casually with the inclusion of point device mode. I know this contradicts heavily with what I said in my original video, but you know, people change and I have warmed up to point device. Once you learn how the game flows and how the bosses work, clearing the sections individually isn't really at all that difficult in my opinion, and point device provides a massive safety net to the player despite what it may look like. Overall, despite going off on a somewhat bad foot with this game with the amount of frustration it originally gave me, I have definitely warmed up to Touhou 15 and can confidently say it's one of the more enjoyable games in the series. Now, I know this one may be a tad bit controversial since I am aware a lot of people do not like Touhou 6, but it's Embodiment of Scarlet Devil for crying out loud. Let's address the elephant in the room. Yes, this game is super RNG. Yes, some patterns can be bullshit. Yes, it's clunky. It didn't age all that well, but all of this is just part of the charm. Touhou 6 is hands down the simplest game in the series. It's easy to learn, easy to pick up, straightforward, and is exactly what it is on the tin. Nothing else to think about this game except for dodging the bullets and shooting the boss. Touhou 6 has definitely become one of my comfort games over time. If I just want a palate cleanser, a slightly challenging game to play through, or just something to kill 30 minutes with, it's very easy to just play through it casually and you never really forget anything with this game since, to be honest, everything about it just screams iconic. From the characters, to the levels, to the OST, everything about this game is just Touhou. It probably has the most popular cast of characters in a Touhou game, with every single character in this game being among the more well-known characters in the whole series. Touhou 6 is definitely the game a lot of people think of when they think of Touhou, whether they realize it or not. Overall, just a very solid game despite its many flaws, with a very unique charm that has evolved to become iconic over the years. Next up on the list we have Perfect Cherry Blossom, another classic game loved by many, and for good reason. I'd say Touhou 7 is one of the simplest games in terms of mechanics and even bullet patterns, and arguably having the biggest safety net of a gimmick in the entire series so far. The cherry border makes this game very easily accessible to anyone and minimizes a lot of frustration, especially for new players. In fact, this entire game seems to be built around being noob friendly, Sack your A-shot type being one of the most obvious things. You get a lot of bombs, good damage, and overall have a lot of room for error. Honestly, the game overall just gives you so much room for error. Now, wouldn't an easy game be bad? For example, I rated 10 Desires way lower on the list due to being boring, but honestly, Touhou 7 hits that sort of sweet spot. The patterns are definitely beginner friendly, being quite simple to understand, but still provide a decent challenge and are by no means a cakewalk, especially in the latter half of the game. The beauty of Touhou 7 is that it allows you to test your skills and basically take bigger risks, minus the frustration of throwing away a good run, due to the abundance of safety nets the game provides a player. A very forgiving yet very fun game that's both easy to pick up and beat, but also allows the player to go into uncomfortable territories without the risk of failure. Oh man, how times have indeed changed. Of all the games in the Touhou series, I think my opinion on this game has seen the most drastic difference, both in terms of difficulty and enjoyment. Originally, I thought this game was pretty unfun back when I couldn't 1cc games. The time mechanic was a really big thorn in my side since I was forcing myself to max out the time meter every single stage. The weird yokai human system and the dance projectiles made this game pretty unenjoyable for me as a new player, which ironically is pretty contrary to popular belief as Touhou 8 is one of the most recommended games for beginners. Over time though, and the more I played the game, the weaknesses and things I found annoying turned into strengths. The slow, dense shots eventually started becoming super fun to dodge, and the abundance of shot types alongside the two final bosses gave this game insane replay value. In fact, this is the game I have probably 1cc'd the most due to me unlocking the solo shot types, which requires a total of 8 1cc's, completing both final A and B on all teams. Touhou 8 is very easy to pick up with some very forgiving mechanics present, but still contains some very complex and intense patterns sprinkled throughout. In fact, I consider Kage and Eirin to still be among the harder stage 6 bosses in the whole series. This game consistently keeps you on your toes, and with the abundance of content it provides with all the shot types, last spells, last words, it makes for a very rich Touhou experience. If the previous two games were fun to me because they're easy with a catch, Mountain of Faith is just fun because it's easy, plain and simple. If there's any instance where I need exactly 20 minutes to burn, there's a very good chance I'll be spending those 20 minutes on the Mountain of Faith 1cc. Now let me just address something before we continue since I already smell everyone typing in the comments. No, I do not hate hard games. No, I don't think hard equals bad. Yes, I'm fully capable of 1cc'ing every game on this list even if only on normal. I just think being able to casually pick up a Touhou game anytime without the need to de-rust and relearn routes significantly adds to my enjoyment factor, and Mountain of Faith, I believe, is the pinnacle of that. Touhou 10, I'd argue, would be the simplest game in the series next to Touhou 6. Some may even say the simplest due to it only having one universal bomb type. There's no gimmicks apart from the scoring one, which while it helps you get extends, is in no way crucial, and most of the time it kind of even just plays itself. Hell, you probably don't even realize how much you're utilizing it due to how naturally it just fits in with your typical Touhou gameplay. Touhou 10 has a lot of streaming, so initially learning it can be a bit of a pain in the ass, especially stage 4, but once you get Touhou 10, there's really not a lot to keep in mind, as it's probably the shortest game in the series. In fact, even if you don't remember how to do parts, how generous this game is with bombs actively mitigates many problematic sections. Now I realize a lot of what I'm saying here may sound like a negative to the game. It doesn't have a lot to offer, it's stupidly easy, requires not a lot of effort and engagement from the player, but there's just something about Mountain of Faith that's so fun to me and keeps me coming back. Everything about this game is just so fun to play through. Even stage 4, which I once hated, I find somewhat enjoyable nowadays. Just a relaxed, fun game that keeps me replaying it time and time again. And finally, probably to no one's surprise, my all-time favorite Touhou game and undisputed best in the series in my opinion is Touhou 11 Subterranean Animism. If you've been on the channel for a while, you'll know how much I glaze this game. I can go on and on about all the things I love about it, but it'll honestly make this video like an hour long, so I'll try to keep it concise. Of all the games in the series, I'd say Touhou 11 is the most fair and consistent game to play. It's not perfect, it has its bullshit for sure, a lot of the shot types suck, and I really only play Remu A if I'm being completely honest, but everything about this game flows so perfectly once it clicks. It's a very learning game, and the first couple hours of playing definitely proved to be hell, but once you understand how it works, once you know how to play the game, it's the smoothest sailing you'll ever have. Bosses are fun, creative, gimmicky, but just to the right extent. And despite it being consistent to play through, definitely still provides just a hell of a challenge and demands the utmost focus from the player. You'll be at the edge of your seat the entire time you play the game, and there'll never be a dull moment even in the early stages. Starting out, this game feels like an insurmountable wall, and it definitely frustrated the hell out of me when I first tried it. Even the first couple bosses just feel absolutely impossible to conquer, with some of the wackiest spell cards up until that point in the series. With time though, you start to climb the wall and realize maybe it wasn't as ridiculously tall as you once thought it was. Suddenly the game just starts making sense and you start executing some insane dodges, capturing the spell cards you once thought were completely undoable. Yeah, I understand I just described Touhou in a nutshell, but I believe this game encapsulates it to the highest extent. To me, this game is as Touhou as it gets, and that's why I think it's undoubtedly the best the series has to offer. So, do you agree with the rankings? Probably not. Some of you are probably absolutely fuming in the comment section why I put their favorite game near the bottom and why some dogshit game is at the top. But who cares, you watched to hear my opinion and it's right here. If you do somewhat agree though, then that's great, glad to know someone else has good taste in games. That's about all for this video though, so whether you agreed with the list or not, I hope you all enjoyed either way. I'm sorry for the somewhat long absence of content. 2024 has been quite rough to me in a multitude of different ways, with both the beginning and the end of the year being some of the most stressful shit I've had to go through in my entire life. Apologies for the radio silence these past couple of months. I didn't want my final video of the year to be an update video, and I didn't want my community tab to be just flooded with apologies for no uploads, since it's legitimately on its way to becoming just that. So I just opted to add it here, since the only people who'd probably care also probably watch till the end as well, hopefully. But yeah, that's all I have to say. Belated Happy New Year to everyone, and again, I hope you all enjoyed the video. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, all that stuff. I'll see y'all in the next one.